gremlins! I've been customizing a piece of clothing for the last month and I want to show it off, and also show off all the pieces of the process that I recorded as I worked on it. Here's what I made. I will show it off in more detail in a little bit, but it is a vampire core, vampire themed customized hoodie that is now available on my Etsy. And I can't wait to show off all the little details that I put into it, because I had so much fun designing and working on this, and I can't wait to show it off. So let me show you what the hoodie looked like before, and then we'll get right into it. The base hoodie is a dark, cool maroon red. I found it in a thrift store a few weeks before I started this project. And here's the hoodie with all my customizations, and I'm about to talk about each detail in, well, detail. So here's the hoodie. I'm so proud of it. I'm going to walk you through all the details that I put into it, and I'll also be cutting in footage of up close and also footage of the actual creation process. I didn't film everything. I didn't film a lot of like the sewing parts, but I did film, for example, the painting of various patches. I have photos of the process, things like that. So we're going to start with the first thing I did, which is actually on the back of the hoodie. We've got these beautiful wings, which I'm so proud of. These are velvet, I think. Like, if not velvet, it's a very velvet-like material, like with that type of texture. They're actually really fun to just pet. But I also put them on the back specifically because I know velvet is a sensory issue for some people, and you never have to touch it. Like, there's no velvet on the inside, it's on the back, so if you want to, like, play with it when you're not wearing the hoodie or something, you can, but there's never a need to have it touching you. Before cutting into my velvet, I cut out a template of the wing shape I wanted from 2 pieces of construction paper taped together. This is velvet left over from a project my mum made for me years ago, and I've been cutting the extra fabric around since. It's so pretty and has such a good texture. Now I have something to use the fabric for. Velvet, while it feels great and looks fantastic, is also an absolute pain to work with, as I was quickly reminded when I tried to start cutting. I could already tell it was slippery, so I taped my template to the fabric in a few places to keep it still. Even with that little bit of tape, everything kept sliding around. As soon as I cut through the tape itself, though, I could feel the difference. So I put my scissors down, picked up my masking tape again, and added a lot more tape around the edge of my pattern, covering as much of the fabric I needed to cut as possible. This made it so much easier to cut out, although I then had to peel the remains of the tape off the wings, being careful not to fray the edges. With one wing down, I flipped my pattern over and taped it to the fabric from the start. As well as being tricky to cut, this velvet was also really tricky to sew. I didn't film the process of pinning the wings in place, but I unpinned and repinned the wings so many times to keep the fabric unwarped and the wings symmetrical. And when actually sewing, I had to be so careful not to shift the fabric. The end result was definitely worth it, but it will be a while before I forget the experience enough to try using velvet again. But anyway, so these are the bat wings that I designed. They're kind of a cross between bat wings and actual demon wings. They are sewn in place with a blanket stitch in black thread around the edge, but then I also sewed lines of white stitches all around the edge and also to add detail through the center. So these are very secure. I've so far washed the hoodie twice since I've added these, and there's been no fraying whatsoever. These were actually surprisingly hard to make because velvet is horrible to work with, and I don't recommend it. It looks beautiful and it feels beautiful, and it is not worth it. Except it is worth it. It was worth it, but I do not like working with velvet. So these were a bit of a pain to make, but I'm so happy with how they turned out. Then we have this sleeve with a sword on it. This is vaguely inspired by the sword that Alucard uses in the show Castlevania, which is a vampire show. It is a very simplified version of that sword. But yes, and I've also got footage of the entire process of making it, so I'll talk more about the sword during that. Masking tape really is the MVP of this project. The first step to painting the sword on the sleeve of this hoodie was to mask out the edges of the blade with tape. I wanted the lines of the sword to be straight and clean and to be able to shade the metal without going outside those lines, and I did not trust my hand to be steady enough to do that without the tape. The blade was easy to tape. The hilt and crossguard involved some more complex shapes though, and proved a little trickier. I ended up creating little sheets of tape and then cutting the shape of the crossguards out, and for the handle I just used a lot of very small pieces overlapped to prevent gaps. I also reworked the shape of the pommel a few times before I was happy with how it looked. Actually painting the sword was fairly simple for the most part. The sword is light silver, and given that it's being painted on a fairly dark fabric background, I started with a layer of plain white paint mixed with fabric medium. With that layer dry, I started on the blade. The blade is light grey, slightly darker on one side than the other due to the beveled edge.
I also added diagonal lines of white as highlights to make the sword look shiny and silver. The hilt was a little trickier to render. The handle itself was fine, although I did need to re-render the pommel a few times to get it looking right. The handle has some shaded ridges, like Alucard's sword, which is my design inspiration. The crossguard was the problem child of this design. Trying to make the middle of the crossguard look slightly protruding in 3D did not look good, especially when I extended the 3D effect across. It might have worked if the symmetry wasn't just a little wonky, but as it stands it looked clumsy and bad. I kept working at it though while my paint was still wet, and in the end I think I got the crossguard looking okay. The final step was to peel all the tape off, and that is very satisfying. It didn't quite all come off in one piece, but the sword suddenly looked so much better with clean-cut edges.
And then we come to all the details on the front. We've got embroidery around both sides of the neck. There was originally also going to be embroidery on the pocket, but the neck embroidery is the reason that this video is coming out several weeks later than I was planning to, because it took so long. And I, by the end, was just so tired of embroidering plain red lines of chain stitches that I decided not to embroider on the pocket, especially once I realized that if I was embroidering on the pocket, I would have to be embroidering only on the pocket and not accidentally through the entire hoodie, because that would render the pocket useless, and that would be so much more complicated, and so I decided just no. So we've just got embroidery around the neck, which I think is fitting also for a vampire-themed thing, because, you know, traditionally that's where a vampire bites you. The embroidery is done with chain stitches. It's just, I've got photos of the process so you can see what it looked like. I basically went around the edges of all my blood drips with a chain stitch and then just gradually added more and more lines to fill it in. So it's a fairly flat texture, it's got a kind of cool texture to it. So yeah, there's that. Then we've got all the patches. I sewed the patches pretty early in the process, but I didn't sew them to the hoodie until yesterday, when I added all the final details in the course of 4 or 5 hours of, oh my goodness, I need to get this video done this weekend. So anyway, we've got patches. This patch I am specifically proud of because it ties into vampire lore, specifically lore that Bram Stoker wrote in the original Dracula novel, which I have at this point read 5 or 6 times. It is my favorite classic book. Anyway, one of the many vampire lores is that if you place the stalk of a wild rose on the coffin of a vampire that is currently in the coffin, it will prevent them from being able to leave the coffin. I don't remember the specifics, I think there's like a time limit, but I don't remember that off the top of my head. But I think it's a very cool piece of vampire lore, and I'm kind of sad that it's not in more adaptations, because it also feels like it would very well fit into the whole romance vampire trope, because the idea of like placing a rose on their coffin does something bad to them, but like you do it as a gesture. It feels like it could fit, and I haven't seen it in any adaptations, so, you know, get on that. But I've got a wild rose embroidered onto this coffin-shaped patch. I had so much fun with this embroidery. Then all the other patches are just painted. This is the only patch with embroidery. Actually, no. One other patch is not painted. It's not embroidery either. This is a patch that is 2 layers of fabric, a layer of red fabric at the back, and then another layer of laced fabric over top of that so the red peeks through. This is just some scrap lace I had lying around, and I felt like lace fit the theme. There's a few aspects of lace in this design. Anyway, then the other patches, all of these have actual footage of the process of making them, unlike the 2 that are only sewn. So I'll talk more about those in detail while I'm showing you the process. But we've got vampire teeth on the pocket, dripping blood. We've got a crowned skull, which feels very gothic, tragedy type thing. I was definitely not at all inspired by Shakespeare. And then we have this patch, which I experimented with a bit doing this patch, where I used masking tape. I cut masking tape in the shape of bats and put it on the plain black fabric, and then sponged paint over top of that to leave the black bats as silhouettes against a grey background, because I did not have any dark grey fabric, and I needed the bats to be the darkest part of the design.
Before these patches were painted, there were 3 nearly identical black rectangles of slightly different sizes, so I labelled them all with tape and a marker so I knew which design I wanted on which. Step 1 of painting those designs was to remove the label and start sketching with a white pencil. I started with the first patch idea I had when brainstorming this project, the vampire fangs. I drew 2 half circles facing each other as guides, then began to draw all the teeth. Next, I began to draw a skull. After my first sketch was a little off-center and a little wonky, the masking tape came in clutch again, helping me basically lift the pencil off the fabric and try again. The second skull sketch worked much better, and I added a slightly tilted crown to his head. I didn't sketch anything on the bat patch. Instead, mostly cut out since I did it entirely out of view of the camera by accident, I cut masking tape into bat shapes and stuck them onto my fabric. There are 3 bats, each getting smaller and further away. While I cut out the tape off camera, I'll draw your attention to the sketchbook sitting next to the patches on the desk. I forgot to show it off while touring the hoodie, but this was my concept sketch after I bought the base item. A few details did change between sketch and finished look, but I think the sketch is pretty good. I got started with some white paint, starting with the teeth. I'm using a thicker bodied white paint for this, so hopefully it'll take many less layers to become opaque against the black fabric. This set of fangs has very long and sharp teeth, both top and bottom, to really drain a victim dry. The top fangs are slightly longer and more elegant though. Also, for some reason my footage kept getting darker. I think it must have been evening, and because I'd locked my brightness, my camera couldn't adjust to losing daylight. I fixed it in the next clip, but it might have overcorrected slightly, and there's only so much I can do in editing. I thinned my white paint out again for the skull. I just wanted a flat layer of white to work off of, shading after that layer is dry. While I wait for that layer to dry, I mix up some grey paint and begin to daub it onto my bat patch with the large brush, since I don't have a spare sponge. I'm trying to feather the grey out, having it lightest around the centre of the patch, then fading into black near the edges. This is both to give the patch focus and a vignette effect, and prevents me from having to sew through the paint when I touch the patch. I kept adjusting the shade of grey I was using to get the right level of darkness. It's like a cloud on a moonlit night, light enough to provide contrast between the bats and the cloud, but dark enough that it still fits the nighttime vibe. I peeled the bats off the patch while the paint was still wet, to make sure the overlapping paint wouldn't peel with the tape, or the tape would get stuck in the dry paint. And this patch worked so well! This is my first try at using masking tape like a reverse stencil, and I will definitely be using this method again. With my white paint dry, I returned to give the fangs a brief second coat, then began to render the skull. While I render bone, I use off-white with some brown or yellow mixed in, I'm keeping this skull completely grayscale. I'm really proud of the shading I achieved. Nothing is too dark to get lost in the black background, but it all looks very gothic. The rendering on the crown is even slightly blotchy, like the metal is dented or tarnished. My final step of painting the patches was adding one spot of colour. I wasn't going to add blood to the fangs originally, but at the last minute I decided to try, and I think it looks very menacing and cool. Now, back to the hoodie, specifically the sleeve.
Also on the sleeve we have just a strip of lace. This was shockingly hard to sew, and you can kind of see on the inside. I didn't quite have enough lace, and it also is a little bit, it doesn't quite meet up, but this is on the inside of the arm, so it shouldn't be seen too much. But yeah, this is just some black lace that I sewed around the edges so that it is attached to the sleeve, and you can kind of see the hoodie colour peeking through, but it's subtle. And then of course we have the lace down the front. This does not impact the ability to use the zipper at all. Yeah. But I've got 2 layers of lace. I've got this like dark reddish lace colour that matches almost perfectly with my fabric patches. And then we've got smaller strips of this beautiful white lace. Again, this lace should not touch your skin at any point when you're wearing it, so it shouldn't be a sensory issue. I mean, I guess you'll have to touch it to like zip and unzip, but that's not sustained touch. I think it should be fine. There is some damage to this lace that I just did this morning by accident, because I had my iron set to too high when I was trying to iron the lace flat. So, warning, use the synthetic level of your iron. I don't think it is a problem, because the lace is already kind of, like, it's not too obvious, and also I feel like having a little bit of damage to the lace kind of also fits the theme, but I do want to be transparent about that. You know, there's no designs on the hood. The hood is just left plain. But yeah, I've been working on this for about a month, on and off. There's many hours of work have gone into this project, and this project is now for sale. I've listed this on my Etsy. There's also a lot of other things on my Etsy that are a lot more affordable. This one, because of the amount of work that has gone into it, I do have to sell it at a higher price to make it worth it for me. But I've also got a lot of t-shirts that have been painted, hand-painted by me, with the same style as these. It is all washing machine safe. So if you would like a t-shirt, that is also available, and I do also have some digital art prints. I think I've got the Griffin poster that I designed a few weeks ago on YouTube. I think that is still available at the moment. That is just a digital file though. So anyway, I'm going to now try this on and show off some different ways to style this hoodie, and then I need to take a bunch of product photos. I had such a fun time with this video. I really hope you enjoy it. I've been working on this for weeks and it's been so much fun the whole time. There have been parts that are kind of tedious, but it's like that with any project. Reminder that this is available on my Etsy, so check it out if you are interested. Yeah, until next time, bye!